Well, shalom, y'all. This is Dr. John Morris, and I want to give you a little bit of an introduction to Isaiah 7 before we dig in for a deeper look at it. Isaiah 7 has to be understood in its political context for a couple of reasons. One is it's a very strange passage in the Bible. It has a lot of strange names, strange countries, strange politics, and it can be very confusing for us to understand. But it is a very important part of not only the Old Testament, but the New Testament, because it deals with the question of when you are surrounded by enemies, when you are being persecuted, when there is no one to turn to or you don't know who to turn to, you should trust God rather than earthly alliances. So that's not only biblical, I think that applies to us today. So it's a strange passage, but it's an important passage, and the way we can understand it is understanding some of the political and geographical context. And the way I want to start is by going through some of the names, because they're just strange names. So before we look at the map, let's talk about some of the players. Now, the big one is Tiglath-Pileser III. Heretofore named TP3. He's the king of the kingdom that is destroying everybody. Everybody is worried about it. This is the Assyrian kingdom that's headquartered in Babylon, and this is the kingdom that will destroy Israel, the northern kingdom. So this is an important thing. Now, closer to home to Judah, there are a couple of other kings. Rezin is the king of Syria. No A on this one, just Syria. And that's centered the power around Damascus. Now, sometimes it's called Aram. We'll show you on the map. But it's a particular geographic territory just north of Israel. Third player is King Pekah of Israel. This is the split kingdom, the northern kingdom of Israel. And Pekah and Rezin, nobody knows how to pronounce ancient Hebrew, have banded together to protect themselves. And they are looking at their southern border, and they're looking at Judah, and there's a problem because Judah has not joined the alliance. So they go to Judah and say, join our alliance or else we'll destroy you. Now, players in Judah are three players also, but you have to balance them because it's not necessarily 3 against 3. There's a king in Judah called Ahaz, but Ahaz has a couple of helps that the other guys don't. He has Isaiah, a prophet from God that can bring God's message to him, and he has God himself. And in this passage, God is going to show Ahaz who he should be trusting, and is going to give Ahaz an opportunity to make the right decision. And as we go through the passage, we'll see if Ahaz makes the right decision or not. So those are kind of the players. Those are the names to keep in mind. Now let's see what that looks like on the map. All right, let me set the context here, and then I'll move in for a closer view. This is the Mediterranean. The northern kingdom of Israel is in here. Southern kingdom of Judah is here. Syria, that's just with an S, is right in here, normally associated with Damascus. In this map, it shows Damascus already being in the Assyrian Empire, but the map represents a little bit later time. The real danger in the world right now is the Assyrian Empire, which is spreading west, is spreading south, and is threatening everybody. It's headquartered over here in Babylon, but it is spreading and it is moving this way. So Syria and Israel are very, very concerned about what Assyria is going to do, and they're very concerned about what Judah is going to do on its southern border. And Judah is concerned about everybody because they've worried about the Assyrian Empire, they're worried about Syria, they're worried about Israel, and they're worried about Egypt. They always have to worry about their southern border. So there's a lot of alliance making and alliance breaking going on here, and everybody is asking, who can you trust? Now, let's take a little bit of a closer look at the territory and see what's going on. All right, now let's see if we can put some names with the places now that we've got a little bit of a closer view of the map. This is Syria up here, and this is Rezin, the king of Assyria, sometimes called the king of Aram. Everybody had different names in that time. I don't know why, but they just did. No one could be happy with one name. But we're talking about Rezin, the king of Syria, just with an S, and they were worried, remember, because Assyria is getting ready to invade them. And you can see the roads run right through their country. So armies normally travel by roads. You see a lot of brown around here, that's desert. The armies wouldn't travel through the desert because of water and just logistics. They would follow the roads, and Damascus is going to be the first stop, and then Israel, the northern kingdom of Israel, which would be right up in here, would be the next stop. You also see some of the surrounding including territories of Ammon, Moab, and Edom. And all of these people at one time or another are fighting with each other, making alliances with each other, and you almost need a scorecard to keep track of who's doing what to whom on that day of the week. But in general, what we're talking about here is Rezin and Pekah from Israel. So Syria and Israel are making an alliance together to protect themselves from attack from the north. And they're looking at the king Ahaz here down in Judah in the south, and they're worried. They have to secure their southern border one way or the other. So they come to Ahaz and say, make an alliance with us against Assyria, and we will protect each other, and we will beat the Assyrians off. Now, that's a hard job for Judah, because Judah knows that Assyria is much bigger than the other two people, but Syria and Israel are much closer to Judah. I'm sorry, I want to make sure I get the name straight here. Syria and Israel are much closer to Judah, so even though they may not be as dangerous as Assyria, they're closer and represent more of a threat. So King Ahaz in Judah has to make a decision. Who is he going to trust? Does he make an alliance with Rezin and Pekah, with Syria and Israel? Does he make an alliance with Israel? Does he maybe even make an alliance with Assyria? And then they can attack those countries in the middle together. So Ahaz is paralyzed with indecision. He knows that he's in deep trouble. He knows he has to do something, and he doesn't know which way to turn. And in many cases, as we see in the Old Testament, he's asking the wrong question. It's not which country do I turn to? He should be saying, to whom do I turn? And to whom should be God. And that's the point of this whole passage. When you're surrounded by enemies, when you don't know which way to turn, when people are forcing you to make a bad decision, make sure you make the right decision and ask, whom do I trust? Not necessarily what do I trust. If you trust in God, then you are guaranteed to have a trustworthy ally. And that's the decision that King Ahaz has to make, and that's the decision that Isaiah tries to help him make, and that's the decision God even tries to help him make with the miracles we see in chapter 7. So now let's get back to chapter 7 and see how this plays out in the narrative genre in chapter 7. You've had a chance now to hear the names several times, so hopefully they're starting to make more sense to you. You've had a chance to see how this all looks on a map, so hopefully geographically it's starting to make sense to you, and you understand why the different kingdoms are worried about what is happening in Assyria. And you've gotten some idea of the politics behind what's going on, the shifting alliances and the decisions about who to trust. So given that as a context, hopefully you're better equipped now to understand Isaiah 7 and what is really going on there. So let's take a much closer look at Isaiah 7 in the next video and really do a close reading of Isaiah 7 based on this introductory context. So until the next time I see y'all, shalom y'all.